thank you everyone for joining me here. Especially thanks to Josh and Mary Beth and Calvin and all the team at 6 Feet Up for putting this on, because this is quite a remarkable thing. I wasn't really sure what to expect from an online conference, but I do feel that I am at a conference, and I'm really enjoying it, and I really appreciate the thought and care and hard work that's gone into this. So I think that's a real contribution to the international Python community. Thank you for that. Also really nice to see the way sponsors have stepped up as well. I wasn't sure if they would be doing that for these online conferences, but here's JetBrains, just as you'd find them in an in-person conference, and that's really nice too. So those are good signs in these difficult times. I'm here to talk to you about dead-end streets. So first, let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm Daniele Procida, as Josh said. There are some details for finding me, and you already know what I look like on a screen, so I don't need to show you that picture really. I work at Devio. We have our product is a cloud management platform for web applications. And I'm also have for many years been involved in Django as a core team member, and also involved in the Django community. So some of you may know me from there. I think lately I became a little bit, not famous, but what passes for famous in our little Python community. I invented or devised the world's cheapest and simplest pen plotter, Brachiograph, which you can build it for about 14 euros total, including the Raspberry Pi that powers it. And it's just 3 servo motors, a clothes peg, a Raspberry Pi, and a few wires, and a pencil for your drawing. So there's all the codes there on the website or on GitHub and documentation. So a lot of people seem to be having fun with those, especially now that they have to find things to do at home. And the other thing that I'm involved in a lot is the African Python movement. Lorena mentioned it yesterday, but for several years I've been involved in Python and PyCons across Africa. PyCon Africa, the first PyCon Africa last year in Ghana was a great success. I've been in PyCon Namibia for several years, and for everyone who's thinking or wondering about a place to go when our lockdowns are over, then I strongly suggest you to try an African PyCon, because it's a fantastic experience. And if you've never been to an African country, then doing it as a Pythonista going to a conference is possibly the best one of all. So let's talk about dead-end streets. Now, as programmers, we tend to love our bleeding edges, and if you do like bleeding edges, then programming really is the field for you, because there's something new on offer just about every single day. And even if we adopt by programmer standards slightly conservative attitudes and sometimes choose edges that don't have actual blood on them, it's still always the sharp edges that we find the most alluring and attractive to us. And similarly, we're quite disdainful of technological dead ends. And to be fair, even beyond programming, dead ends don't usually get praised for being dead ends. The word dead isn't one with many positive associations, let's say. But at the same time, technology is full of dead ends. Many technologies and directions that once seemed to have wide open futures are now quite clearly dead ends. And we find ourselves in these dead ends all the time. So my question is this: what should we do when we realize that the technical choice we have made is a dead end? And I think the answer is, try again with my clicks. And I think the answer is nothing, because dead end streets are generally the best places to live. And I say this as someone who'd quite like to live in a nice, quiet cul-de-sac. Dead-end streets really are good places to live. They're quiet and safe, and children can play more safely on their bicycles and skateboards, and you don't have maniacs using them as shortcuts to get somewhere else in fast and noisy and dangerous ways. and there's less pollution in the air, and you can do things like stand in the middle of the road to chat to your neighbors without having to think twice about it first. So a dead-end street isn't on the way to somewhere else. It's a destination in itself. It's a place to be. And real life dead-end streets are good places to grow up and stay and live. And actually, I like dead-end streets in technology too. And those of us who live and work in technological dead ends do so on the whole quietly and happily and effectively and profitably. And most of the time, the worst thing that we have to put up with is the scorn of the restless youth who look at us with disgust and pity, because for them, dead ends represent stagnation or boredom and generally the appalling sin of going nowhere. Well, the thing is, if you're going to be a restless youth in perhaps a Bruce Springsteen song, well, that's very romantic, but it's also a terribly inconvenient way to live. It doesn't get much useful work done, except maybe perhaps the work of helping Bruce Springsteen sell his records. But in a comfortable technological dead end, your energies can be spent getting useful things done, not contending with new and unexpected and unfamiliar things that demand to be learned and mastered and often demand to be fixed. Now, maybe the restless youths amongst us have enough energy to spare for all that, but still, a remarkable amount of this valuable energy in the software industry is consumed by a kind of fetishized concern with the means of production rather than the ends of production, and by the urge to find new ways to solve old problems. I should add, often unnecessarily, because they've already been solved. I think that in pragmatic and cost-benefit terms, it's really quite hard to justify being a restless youth in a Bruce Springsteen song. And even in the songs, the outcomes are generally, let's say, not favorable. Now, I don't deny that restlessness and rebelliousness and rejection of the accepted ways in technology can be great fun, which is, of course, one reason why, in fact, we spend so much time engaged in exactly those pursuits, even when we know perfectly well that what we're spending our energies doing in software isn't really justified on pragmatic grounds. And it's why so much of the free time of the programmer is also spent programming when the programmer doesn't have to. And it's great fun. And I understand that. And I do the same thing and I enjoy it too. But speaking only for myself, I already spend far too much of my time in front of a computer for work anyway. So I know that what's good for me is to be finding my fun and spending my free time and my extra energies, if I have any, on, say, perhaps a bicycle going up a mountain, and not spending more time sitting down at a desk or worse, as usually happens, on a sofa with a computer on my lap with my internal organs all squashed together, hunched up so that I look like some kind of internet connected vulture or something like that. So let's leave fun aside, because I think that what matters here right now is work. And I think that in pragmatic cost-benefit terms, staying in comfortable technological dead ends is clearly the best and most sensible thing to do. Josh, you could help me out just by pinging me in the chat to confirm to me that the audio quality and the picture are still good enough for everyone. And then I'll...
Yep, you are still good. This is fantastic.
Fantastic, thank you. See, without feedback, it's tricky doing these things. So, I want to be clear that this is not just an argument for old, tired people who have given up. A dead-end street is a destination that doesn't need to go anywhere else. It has already arrived at a good place to be. In technology, something becomes a comfortable dead end, not because it never had any future, but because it did go somewhere, because it did achieve something. A comfortable dead end is a solved problem. That's what makes it comfortable. That's why it's good to be in a comfortable technological dead end. And I want to illustrate this with an example. I'm going to show you a dead end we find ourselves in at DVO. I'll show you why it's comfortable. I'll show you the problems it solves well. I'll show you how people work with it quietly, happily, effectively, and profitably, and why they like it so much. And then I want to show you why we have to get out all the same. So we'll come back to this question of getting out afterwards, but first let me show you, take you on a little tour of the dead end. Our comfortable dead end is our ALDRYN Django framework. It's an open source Python system that allows Django web applications to configure themselves automatically based on discovery processes for things like services such as database and media storage and other services, so that the developer doesn't have to do that themselves. And it uses wrappers written in Python that allow Python libraries such as Django itself or Django CMS or some other library to manage their own settings programmatically and intelligently through introspection. And now it's live or recorded demo time. I say I've recorded this demo, but I'm going to try and do it live because everything is working so far. So let's try that. So now you should see my web browser, and what you're looking at here is the, oh, where's my pointer gone? I cannot see my own pointer, that's interesting. Haha, this is, oh, there it goes. I don't know what that was all about. So this is the DVO control panel. We provide hosting and web deployment services. I am going to, oh, I know what I need. Excuse me, 1 second. Good. This is a little bit, there we are. I'm going to add a new project here. I'm going to name it Python Web Conference Demo. And I'm just going to, you can run pretty much any stack, any application on our platform, as long as it can be Dockerized. But here I'm going to use one of our ready-to-go project types, Python with Django, using our ALDRYN framework. I'm going to use our internal Git server, although we could use an external one. And I'm going to use our default AWS North America region, and I'm going to just create a free project. So I'm using all the defaults. So now the project's being created, which means some Git commits are being written to the repository, defining the Docker file and adding other components to the Django project. Right away, what I'm going to do is I'm going to deploy it here in the test environment. We've got a test environment and a live environment. What this does is, now I've got a network error coming up on my screen, which normally tells me that my network is not working well. Josh, how am I doing?
You're still good.
I'm still good. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, so I'm deploying the project in its test environment. And what it's doing, first of all, it's putting together those backing services, database and media storage, Postgres database on a cluster, media storage in Amazon S3 buckets. And then it's going to clone the Git repository. And from that repository, it's going to build a Docker image. That's what it's doing now. So the repository contains the instructions, and the image that it's building is a kind of template from which you can stamp out instances of the web application. And it's now running Django migrations in there. Oh, in fact, it's ready to go. It's done various things. It's connected up all those backing services, and it's put the web containers into circulation. We can actually log into it here. We can log in with our single sign-on. So here's a running Django project ready for further development, not much in it, but let's do something about that. I'm going to take the ID of the project here, copy it. I'm going to jump into my terminal, and I will use our DVO CLI, DVO project setup, and then the ID. What will happen here on my machine locally is exactly what happens on the cloud. It will clone the repository, it will build an image, and then from the image, it will launch the containers all wired up to the services they need. So you can see it's running some pip installation there. It's pulling down the database from the test environment, and it's going to set that up for me locally. Now, I don't have a Postgres cluster running on my machine, so it's going to set up the Postgres database in another Docker container just on my machine. And similarly, I don't have S3 buckets on my machine, so it's just going to use local file storage for that. Okay, and that's it, ready to go. So let's go into the Python web components demo. I'm now in the directory, and I'm going to run docker compose up. I'm using docker compose to manage these this project, and this is going to start up the project. And there you can see the Django run server has started up in there. Let's go to the web browser and let's have a look at localhost on port 8000. Oh, I don't know why it adds that little fragment to my URL. I don't need that. There we are. We can log in with the same single sign-on. And what you see here in running locally is pretty much, well, it is the same project running in an environment that's almost exactly the same as the one on the cloud, because they're both inside Docker. Now, as I said, it's not doing very much. So what I'm going to do here is install Django Photolog. Maybe you're familiar with Django Photolog. It's quite a nice gallery application. So let's stop the application and I'm going to open the code. Let me make sure this is large enough for you to see. So first of all, I'm going to add what I want to the, let me make that a bit bigger for you, add that what I want to the requirements. Django Photolog, oh, my typing, this is why I should record these things, equals 3.11. Okay, and I need to add a couple of items to the installed apps in settings. And I'll do that here. Photolog. And it also needs sorted. Oh, my typing M to M. Okay, my typing is much better when I'm not doing it in front of an audience. Now, I know you're looking at this and thinking, what's this installed apps.extend? This is what our ALDRYN Django framework does for us. At this point here, all the settings for the applications that are already in here, Django and the single sign-on application, are injected into this settings file, which is why this settings file doesn't contain very many settings, but they're all here. The middleware, the template settings, the context, media and static file settings, they're all here. And they've been applied programmatically by ALDRYN Django's configuration. So there's a little bit of magic going on. Now, it's open source magic. This is all visible to you, and it is literally open source as well. So it's not too obscure, but there is a bit of magic here doing that for me. So I've already got some installed apps. I'm simply adding to that list here. Let me save that now. What else do I need to do? I need to go into the URLs. And I'm not going to type this in myself because it contains more than one bracket, and I don't dare try and type a line with more than one bracket at a time because it always goes wrong. So I'm just going to copy that in there, but I will do from Django.urls import path because we need that. So what this is doing is putting the Django Photolog URLs at the root of the path tree. So let's save that. What else do I need to do? I need to rebuild the Docker image because I've changed something in the project that needs to be reflected, and that is the requirements that I added. So let's rebuild the image here. Docker compose build. Shouldn't take long, it's just very quick, in fact. Okay, so now if I do, oh no, before, I need to run my migrations, python manage.py migrate, okay? And because all this is going to happen inside the Docker container, I need to precede this with docker compose run web, like that. That's because Django Photolog has some new database tables that it needs. And now I can start it up again. Docker compose up. Yeah, helps if I type docker compose properly. Docker compose up. And if I go to the project here in my local browser, oh, there we are. There's the new application. And one more thing I want to do, the display size for photos, and this is a measly 400, so I'm going to set that to 1170. And now I'm going to add a gallery of photos that I packed up into a little zip archive earlier. Okay, there they are. And I'll call this, they are news photographs of protesters and counter-protesters. So that's uploaded. Let's have a look at this now, as the site is not in the, oh, I forgot something. Of course I did. I know what I forgot. Excuse me 1 second. Django Photolog comes with a handy set of static files for CSS and some templates. And here they are. I'm simply going to drag them into the project. Let's put them there, overwriting everything else. So I'm just copying those from the ones that ship with Django Photolog. And let me go back to this and try refreshing this. There we are. And here's my gallery of protesters and counter-protesters. And I think these really are people of our time. They've all been in the news over the last months, or in some cases years. And I know whose side I'm on. So anyway, what I've done here, I've successfully installed something, I've tested it, I've got it working, and I'm happy about that. So what I want to do now is deploy it on the cloud. So let's stop this here. Let's have a look at what Git status has to tell me. So I'm going to add the changes to Git. Git add, I need to add, what do I need? Requirements, of course, settings, the URLs, the static files, and the templates. Git commit -m added photo log. I'm rushing over some things here. You can, of course, ask me some questions, and I'd be happy to answer them later. But I've got a lot that I want to get done. So I'm going to push this up to the cloud, and if I'm fast, I'll get to the control panel in time to see the commit arriving here. As soon as this refreshes in a moment, we'll see that there is a new commit there. And there we are, one undeployed commit. And there it is, the one I just added now that you saw me do. And so I can deploy this again like I did before by hitting this button, or I can use our API. I'd like to do this because I always like doing things on command lines. DVO project deploy. And that's going to use the API to deploy just as if I'd hit the button. I could also do DVO project deploy live, and it would deploy the live site. Oh, and while that's doing that, on the cloud, all I've pushed is the code, but I've also got some media files that you saw, and of course the local database. I want to push those too. So DVO project push DB. Let me push up the database to the cloud. Yes, I'm going to override the cloud. This is always on the test environment. I could push to live, but I'm not going to do that now. DVO project push media. Okay, so you can see that the deployment has finished here in the control panel, and in the database has been pushed, and the media is still uploading. So let's go to, this is the site that I had on our test server a few minutes ago. So if I refresh that, we should see the new application. There it is. And if I go here, I should have a there we are. There's my gallery with my images of a middle-aged Swedish woman whacking a neo-Nazi on the back of his head with her handbag. And that's the kind of person that I would like to be. So I've shown you the complete cycle. The only thing left to do is things like deploy it to live in our control panel, but I've shown you the interesting things that I want to show you about ALDRYN Django. So time for me to go back to my keynote presentation. I survived that, hooray. Good, so ALDRYN did a great deal for me in this. Thank you very much, ALDRYN. In this example, let's look at some of the things it did. It configured all of the Django settings appropriately for this particular deployment platform, and also for each of the environments. I did it in the test cloud environment and in my local environment. So for example, locally and in the test environment, debug is true, but That's not the case in the live environment. Similarly, the live environment server is publicly accessible, but the test server requires a login before you can see it. Another example, in the cloud environment, ALDRYN automatically knows to use the appropriate S3 bucket or Microsoft Azure blob storage or whatever, but in the local environment, it just uses the host's file storage. And it takes care of the correct configuration requirements at different times as well. So when building the image, we don't have connected services like database or cache wired up. So those settings are automatically configured to run without the real backends, just at build time. And depending on various conditions, it knows whether to install certain middleware and can do so introspectively, making sure that a particular middleware is inserted at the right point in a list, for example. And the ALDRYN framework exposes many of these configuration options as environment variables, either for automatic configuration or manual configuration. So for example, all those database settings, they're supplied by environment variables. Also, it allows other ALDRYN-aware reusable applications that might be installed in the project to add their own post-build commands. For example, a command to update the S3 headers or run a fixed tree command for Django CMS, and so on. And the ALDRYN Django framework really is, I think it's really is nice. I love the way that it allows me not to have to think about any of those things. I love the way that right now on my MacBook here, I have 100 or more different Django projects, and all that I had to do to set up any one of them was to run a single command. I've never had to configure a database, and I rarely, if ever, need to touch a setting that is related to deployment rather than to application development. And every one of those 100 or more projects on my machine is ready to be deployed to a live cloud environment at a moment's notice. So the ALDRYN framework has saved me literally hundreds of hours of time. And in that respect, the fact that it's a dead end is completely irrelevant. I don't care about that. It just works. It has huge value for me, and I'm very comfortable with it. So thank you, ALDRYN. It's a refined, elegant, practical, tested, and reliable. It represents a solved problem. So what is the problem then? Well, our problem is that it's not that our comfortable dead end doesn't work. It works brilliantly. It's not that it failed to fulfill its promise. It has fulfilled its promise. It was just what we needed when we needed it, and we can still work perfectly well in it right now, and we still intend to. And right now it continues to solve those problems, and it's going to continue doing that. But what's different now is that now we want to do some new things. The problem is that our needs have changed. Our changed needs mean that some limitations of the ALDRYN framework, which have previously not been an issue, look like they're starting to get in our way. So here are 5 limitations of the ALDRYN framework, our comfortable dead end. First, most obviously, it's specific to our DVO infrastructure. That means if somebody wants to migrate their existing web application, they'll need to do a bit of work to make use of the technology. Fine, but then it's only going to work for DVO, which is not so good. And if they decide to migrate in the other direction away from DVO, then there's also some friction there too. And we're a company that makes a big deal of openness and open source and no risk of lock-in and so on. So it stands out a bit. It's a vendor-specific technology. And we ourselves always prefer to use vendor-neutral technologies when we can. We trust them better. And so other people trust them better too. And vendor-neutral technologies tend to do better. And it's Django-specific. That was fine when DVO was a Django-specific platform, but not so great now that we offer a stack-neutral platform for Dockerized applications. We don't want to have to build a parallel framework like ALDRYN for all the different languages we want to provide this kind of support for. And it's too opinionated. And yes, I think they're quite friendly opinions and not wild ones, but even so, too many assumptions in the framework are built around those opinions, and it becomes difficult if a user doesn't share them. It's too magical. I showed you a little glimpse of the magic. People like to see what's happening inside, and the magic obscures that a little bit. It's not black magic, and it's all published in open source libraries, and you can dig in and discover what's going on, but people still are a little bit suspicious of magic, and you can understand that. And it's not, finally, attractive enough for third parties. We'd like to help seed a mostly self-sustaining ecosystem, but those only grow if there's sufficient incentive for third parties to invest their energies in it. And at the moment, there isn't. It's worth the investment for us and for a small number of third parties, but that's about it. Now, all these things are things that make the ALDRYN framework a dead end. Now, they're not really problems, they're limitations, but everything has limitations. And up till now, these limitations haven't mattered. In some respects, the limitations were part of what made the ALDRYN Django framework possible and made it work. You know, we couldn't have done it without these limitations. The problem is that now our needs are starting to change and we need to move beyond them. So we love what the ALDRYN framework achieves, and we want to keep every single bit of that. But what we need now is a vendor neutral, stack neutral, less opinionated alternative that's also attractive to third party developers. So that's what we're working on now, and it's called FLAVOURS. And FLAVOURS is an open specification for portable web applications. FLAVOURS aims to provide a way to make it straightforward to deploy web applications, incorporating different reusable libraries built in different frameworks and languages, wiring them up to different services, and doing it all on different hosting providers. FLAVOURS aims to make it straightforward for developers of reusable libraries, whatever language they're written in, whether it's Django CMS, of course, in Python, or Laravel in PHP, and so on, to make their software discoverable and usable by FLAVOURS-aware systems, just the way that ALDRYN does, by incorporating machine-readable information about things like distribution, setup, and configuration, including provisioning of service dependencies. So for example, say you install Haystack, maybe you want the platform to know that it should then make sure that Elasticsearch is provided. FLAVOURS, unlike the ALDRYN Django framework, is stack neutral. A flavor manager is a language or framework specific implementation for each stack. And one can be created for each stack that manages these concerns, installation and configuration, in the appropriate way for that stack. And we're making progress with other implementations already, actual working implementations, particularly for PHP and Java. We're experts mainly in Django. So now we're concentrating on other stacks to help avoid baking in our Django biases into the way we do things. FLAVOURS aims to make it possible for providers of services such as we see here databases or Microsoft blob storage or Elasticsearch, databases, media storage, other things, to expose their configuration, to expose APIs for provisioning and so on in stack neutral and vendor neutral ways. And above all, finally, FLAVOURS is intended not to be a DVO framework. ALDRYN started its life tightly coupled to the DVO platform. In fact, nearly most of ALDRYN Django's functionality can be enjoyed independently of DVO, technically at least, but it still retains kind of legacy assumptions that we couldn't expect other hosting providers to want to work with it. By contrast, FLAVOURS has been conceived and designed as a vendor-neutral framework. The FLAVOURS implementations we're building for different frameworks and language stacks are already vendor independent. So already, in fact, some aspects of FLAVOURS could be used right now, even with other hosting providers, without any explicit support from those providers. But we hope that other vendors like Heroku or DigitalOcean, or even people with their own cloud infrastructures, will want to build in the support that make this portability of applications and services between providers easier than ever before. So a flavor, in summary, defines how a web application's components interface with each other, the application code itself, the third-party libraries, the services, and doing this independently of vendor, language, framework, or platform. Oh, by the way, using YAML for configuration and just very simple glue code. So portability is what we're aiming for. Portability is the key. You've got a web application that you want to bring to DVO, great. Its own FLAVOURS configuration will provision the right kind of database and media storage on DVO and wire them up into the application so that you don't need to take care of their configuration or their connection. or you'd like to take your project away from DVO to another hosting provider, perhaps to Heroku or your own cloud infrastructure, fine. The same Flavors configuration system will mean that your application doesn't need to be rewritten in any way, and its access to its services won't need to be reconfigured, or the way it installs its dependencies. So you can find out more about this at flavors.dev, including documentation, some examples, and a Slack channel. Please join us. We need more people in this. The Flavors project has started with DVO, but it's an open specification, and it's intended to be and remain an open project. We need other participants in this endeavor with different interests from ours, different needs, different expertise, because it's going to have to reflect all of those different things if it's going to be the success we want it to be. And if it is a success, of course, it will benefit DVO, but it will benefit all of us. And like other such projects that are open projects that are successful, it will benefit many more parties than those who are actually active participants. In the best case, it has the potential to make web application deployment better for everyone who uses cloud systems. So I want to wrap this up by returning to my dead end that I'm so fond of. Where does this leave me? I do feel that I've got very comfortable with ALDRYN Django, and to be honest, I don't really care if it's a dead end. I'm quite happy to remain there. But sadly, this is not about me, as people like to say. The fact is that ALDRYN is going to be absorbed into Flavors. Eventually it will live on as a kind of rather obsolete legacy flavor, and will be superseded by a better way of deploying Django web applications. So we're leaving, but we're taking the dead end with us in a way. But even if one day it's an obsolete dead end, the ALDRYN Django framework will have had a very important function. A good dead end helps guarantee the quality of new technologies. The fact that the ALDRYN framework is so refined and elegant and practical and tested and reliable, despite its limitations, raises the bar for anything that has to supersede it. It has set standards. Flavors is not there yet, but at every point it will be measured against them. ALDRYN, however obsolete it becomes, however dead-endy it might be looking, means that everything we do right now with Flavors comes with a built-in demand to make it at least as good as ALDRYN is already. So ALDRYN guarantees the quality of Flavors to come. Flavors will have grown up in the shelter and safety of a comfortable cul-de-sac, like a fortunate child. It will have grown up with good examples of behavior and high expectations all around it that it will seek to recreate and then surpass. So in a certain sense, a good dead end lives on even after it's dead. A good dead end technology creates a safe space and creates high expectations for the development of the technology that will come after it. A good dead end makes its own limitations plain and helps make it clear how long you can stay there, and helps prompt you to think about the way out if that becomes necessary. A good dead end helps show you how to get out in a planned and orderly fashion so that you don't have to leave all the good things behind. Now, that's very much less romantic than the trajectory of the restless youth in the Bruce Springsteen songs. But while being romantic and restless and tragic and doomed is very good to enjoy in songs and stories, in real life, it's much less enjoyable than living in a comfortable dead-end street. And I really do think that it's the same with technology. So long live dead ends. Thank you.